3, 2, 1. Booster ignition. And liftoff. The crew of Artemis 2 now bound for the moon. Humanity's next great voyage begins.
On April 6, 2026, NASA's Artemis 2 mission completed its highly anticipated lunar flyby. But as the Orion spacecraft crossed the far side of the moon, communications with Earth were severed for 40 minutes. NASA claims this was a standard loss of signal, but when you look at the strange solar anomaly captured during the far-side eclipse, the unprecedented distance they traveled past the moon, and the sudden rush to return to Earth by April 10, a different picture emerges. What really happened during those 40 minutes in the dark? For over 50 years, the moon has been an untouchable relic of the past. Since the final Apollo mission in 1972, humanity has been strictly confined to the shallow, safe waters of low Earth orbit. We were told by the highest authorities that the moon was nothing more than a dead, barren rock. We were told the science was settled. The budget was better spent elsewhere, and there was simply nothing left to explore in the lunar dust. The narrative was pushed so hard for so long that the public accepted it without question. But then, suddenly and aggressively, everything changed. Without a clear public mandate, NASA initiated the multi-billion-dollar Artemis program, rushing at breakneck speed to put human eyes back into deep space. On April 6, 2026, for 40 excruciating minutes, the 4 highly trained astronauts aboard Artemis 2 were completely cut off from mission control. No audio, no telemetry data, no video feed. NASA casually calls this a routine loss of signal, spinning it as a simple matter of orbital mechanics where the physical mass of the moon blocks radio waves. But when you examine the exact unprecedented trajectory of this mission, the specific records they quietly broke, and the bizarre visual anomaly captured just moments before the blackout, the official narrative shatters what really happened in the dark. Did the most advanced communications array in human history simply fail, or was the feed intentionally, surgically cut? Today, we're going to look at the unedited, uncensored timeline of Artemis 2 and uncover the terrifying implications of what they might have found waiting for them on the far side. To understand the true purpose of Artemis 2, we have to look at where they actually went, rather than where NASA said they were going. The public was sold a highly sanitized story about a lunar flyby, framed as a necessary stepping stone to eventually putting boots back on the surface. But the moon wasn't the final destination. It was merely a gravitational slingshot. As the Orion capsule rounded the moon, it didn't just skim the surface and head home, it was intentionally propelled deep into the abyss, breaking a record that had stood completely untouched for over half a century. Artemis 2 traveled further from our planet than any human beings in history, blowing past the 252,000-mile mark set by the ill-fated Apollo 13 mission. You have to ask yourself, why the sudden, desperate need for such an extreme distance? If the stated goal of the Artemis program is to establish a sustainable lunar base, why push a manned crew tens of thousands of miles past the moon into the uncharted, heavily radiated void of deep space for decades? Whistleblowers, Black Project insiders, and independent researchers have suggested that the government has been closely monitoring anomalous activity, not on the lunar surface itself, but in the deep space corridors just beyond it. We know they constantly monitor near-Earth objects and interstellar anomalies. By framing this extreme trajectory as a simple, record-breaking milestone for the history books, the agency secured the perfect, unquestionable cover for a deep space reconnaissance mission. They needed human eyes and classified, highly advanced military-grade sensor arrays in a very specific sector of space at a very specific time. And that brings us to the chilling events of Monday, April 6th. As Orion approached the far side, plunging into the moon's shadow, the geometry of their orbit aligned to create a stunning, once-in-a-lifetime phenomenon. A total solar eclipse viewed entirely from the vacuum of space. From their isolated vantage point, the massive, jagged silhouette of the moon completely blocked the sun. The intense, blinding glare of the solar disk was extinguished, leaving only the corona, the sun's superheated outer atmosphere, glowing like a ragged, ghostly halo in the pitch black. It is exactly during this precise window, as the local environment was plunged into absolute freezing shadow, that things took a profoundly strange turn. Right before the telemetry feed was severed, automated optical cameras aboard the Orion spacecraft captured a rapid series of images of this eclipse. NASA eventually released these images to the public, focusing the press exclusively on the awe-inspiring beauty of the celestial event. But independent image analysts and civilian astronomers immediately noticed something horribly wrong. In the absolute highest resolution frames, just along the terminator line where the dark lunar horizon meets the glowing solar corona, there are distinct, structured anomalies. These aren't lens flares. They aren't digital artifacts, and they certainly aren't sensor glitches. They are highly geometric, luminescent shapes that appear to be holding a stationary, deliberate position relative to the lunar surface. They maintain their structure across multiple frames, defying any natural explanation. NASA's official damage control statement quickly claimed that any visual distortions in the photos are simply lunar dust illuminated by the sun's ambient light, or perhaps flashes from micrometeoroids striking the surface at the exact moment the shutter clicked. But since when does a random meteoroid impact create a sustained, perfectly structured emission of light that hovers above the surface? The official explanation feels incredibly rushed. A convenient, copy-paste dismissal of raw visual evidence that directly contradicts their tightly controlled narrative of a dead, inactive moon. But the timing of these anomalies is the most damning piece of evidence of all. Because exactly as the Orion spacecraft passed over these specific coordinates, precisely when these glowing structures would have been in direct, unobstructed view of the crew, the signal died. The 40-minute dead zone. According to textbook orbital physics, it is a known reality that the physical mass of the moon will block standard radio transmissions. We have known this since the early days of the Apollo era, but what the general public doesn't understand is the staggering level of contingency planning that goes into modern 21st century spaceflight. In 2026, we possess an absolute armada of deep space relays, orbital satellites, and massively powerful communication networks designed specifically to prevent dead zones. The idea that the most technologically advanced, highly funded space agency on the planet would allow their flagship, multi-billion-dollar mission to fly entirely blind and deaf during the absolute most critical, high-risk phase of the journey is not just highly unlikely, it is insulting to our intelligence. Was the blackout truly an unavoidable consequence of physics? Or was it a strict tactical necessity? If the geometric anomalies captured on the edge of the eclipse were, in fact, an artificial presence, the protocol would be immediate and absolute. Cut the public feed. Sever the unencrypted telemetry. Plunge the entire mission into a forced, heavily monitored blackout while classified. Deeply encrypted military channels are utilized to assess the threat. During those 40 minutes on the dark side, the crew of Artemis 2 wasn't just sitting in silence waiting for the radio to crackle back to life. They were observing. They were recording. They were gathering high-level intelligence on whatever was waiting for them in the shadow of the moon. When the Orion spacecraft finally re-emerged from the far side and contact with Houston was miraculously re-established, the entire tone of the mission had subtly yet undeniably shifted. The first images sent back were not of the lunar surface they had just flown over. Instead, they beamed back a picture of the Earth, a profound, melancholy Earth set, our entire fragile planet sinking behind the bleak lunar horizon. It was a beautiful, deeply poetic image, and it was the absolute perfect distraction. The mainstream media immediately seized on the Earth-set photo, plastered it across every news network, and heralded the flyby as a complete, flawless success. It was the perfect sleight of hand. Look at the beautiful blue marble, and completely ignore the shadows. Now, the crew is rushing back. Artemis 2 is hurtling toward Earth, scheduled for a high-speed, fiery splashdown in the Pacific Ocean on April 10. They're bringing back terabytes of highly encrypted data, high-resolution video that the public will never be allowed to see, and the first-hand testimony of 4 people who witnessed what really exists on the far side. We will be given the sanitized version. We will be given the heavily edited, color-corrected highlight reel of a triumphant mission, but the silence of those 40 minutes speaks louder than any prepared press conference ever could. The Artemis program has only just begun. NASA is aggressively pushing to return to the moon, not for the sake of science, and not for the benefit of humanity. They are going back to their territory. Whatever they saw during that eclipse, whatever triggered the total communications blackout, it wasn't a rock, and it wasn't dust. We are not alone in this orbital neighborhood. And the next time humanity launches into the dark, it won't be a simple flyby. It will be a confrontation